Hey, BT here. We are going inside How to Master Nous. Had no idea what Nous was until David schooled me. Come inside and check it out. You talked a lot in this episode, David, about Robert Greene's book, The Laws of Human Nature, and that was published in 2018. So first of all, I was surprised to see that it was relatively new. Second of all, I was just surprised to see it because I have not seen you have that book in front of you. I'm sure you've had it so many times, but apparently I wasn't ready to see it. But when did you first come across that title, and what motivated you to just dive back into it during this time?
Well, I think I got the book originally when it came out. I think I got it in audio format first. So what made me come across it? I was watching a podcast, and you know how you have the bar on YouTube on the side while you're watching one, and I forget who the podcaster was, but they were interviewing Robert Greene, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen him on a podcast, right? So I wanted to see what he was doing. He was talking about some stuff. And I always pay very close attention when something just comes into my life like that. And it's usually like with books and stuff, right? Like it'll just pop in. And somebody was interviewing him about the book. Well, it made me go like, maybe I need to go back and listen to that again. Maybe there's something there. And he started talking about it, and I was listening to what he was talking about. And I'm like, this guy really does have some good stuff that I think would apply to certain things. So I went and checked my library to see what I had in book cover. Because when I'm doing stuff for the podcast, I like a hard copy of it, right? I don't. Otherwise, audio is fine because that's how I really rip through books. But when I'm going in to study them to prepare for something, I want a hard copy. So I wanted to see if I had that in a hard copy, and I did not. I did not have it in a hard copy. I had several other ones, but I did not. I had it on the phone. So I ordered it, and I got it. I may have it in some book file somewhere. I've got so many of them, I don't know. But when the ones that I checked in my main library, it was not there. And what was the rest of your question?
Just trying to get a sense of what motivated you to get back into it. I mean, obviously, there's a lot going on in the country right now.
Yeah,
I'm sure there was a message for you there.
Yeah, so I got it, and this was before I came back into the office. It was basically sitting with a couple of other of his books on my kitchen table. And I was thinking about, I just needed to put some time aside. I wanted to go through it and see what jumped out at me, just looking for material type thing. And then we started to get into all the craziness and the sadness, actually, about George Floyd and what happened. And as this escalates and gets crazier and crazier and crazier with everything that's going on with it, and I'm watching people react. I'm like, I want to contribute to the mindset that's going on with the fear around all of this right now. But I didn't necessarily want to make it a George Floyd thing. Sure. Because it's not just that. It's also COVID. It's just a very tumultuous time that we're living in, and so I picked up the book and I started looking through the book, and the very first lesson jumped out at me, and I was thinking about, Athena, and because I don't know if you know this, but I did a huge study of the Roman gods and the Greek gods when I was in school, and for like a couple of years.
I did not know that.
A big thing. So I remembered that from what I had studied. And I thought, oh, you know what? And he started talking about nous. And I was like, damn it, I haven't heard that word in forever, So I'm like, this is interesting. Let me go back through this. Let me see his take on it. And I was looking at his take, and I thought, I really love the way that he approaches this to really bring in the idea of, number one, how do we get the truth? But getting out of the intense emotion and stop making fucking decisions when we're at the height of fear or craziness or confusion or whatever. Because we inevitably fuck things up when we do that. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of that going on right now.
Sure.
People and listen, I'm not making the emotion wrong, like deservedly so. There is so much craziness going on right now. I totally understand why people are experiencing what they're experiencing internally, but you have to learn how to process through that, right? So you don't make things worse. You know?
Yeah, because you're coming at it from a standpoint of the emotional mind rather than the rational mind.
Right.
You're not being
100%.
rational. And usually when I mess things up around my house or at work or something, it's usually because I let emotions get over the top of me, and nobody wins in that situation. And I think that's what we're seeing in this sort of lose-lose proposition that's happening right now. People are hurting, and this was like the perfect, like you said, powder keg.
It was a powder
there's
keg.
Emotions, heavy, and we're not like you said, I love that you pointed out, you're not making the emotion wrong. You're basically just saying, look, take a step back and breathe for a minute and look at it and approach it from a rational standpoint as opposed to emotion. Because when that gets over the top of you, it's tough to get out.
Well, when you get into that intense emotion, you rationalize, which is rationalize to your mind. So you make right what you're feeling. You look for verification of what you're feeling. And it's not always true, you know? Like, emotions are big liars a lot of the time. So if you step back from it, then you can say, okay, you know what? Let me learn about this. Let me find out what's true before I go, flipping off at the mouth or whatever. Let me learn. Let me study. Let me decide what's right for me. In these situations, what's right for me? What's true for me? What do I need to learn? Where am I wrong? Really doing the introspection and then getting down to a place where you can make a rational decision and good choices for yourself.
Yeah, that is the goal, right?
That's the goal.
That is the goal, absolutely. So you heard it here. Make sure and practice that. And also, we did link in the show notes to the laws of human nature. I mean, it's right in the title. So if you want a good study in human nature and how people behave or respond or react, go check out Robert Greene's book, and that's in our show notes for this particular episode.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal book, and I'll probably, now that I'm in it, I'm probably going to pull stuff out of several of his books for some of the episodes, at least in some part of the teaching, because he's great. One of the things about Greene is that when he's going to write a book, it usually takes him 2 to 3 years to write it, and he studies about 300 books to write one. So it's factual information, it's well studied, it's well thought through, it's very well articulated. He's very good at what he does.
And most likely unbiased, I assume.
Yeah,
he's pulling from all areas.
Yeah, he's got 6, 7 New York Times bestsellers, I mean, the thing was, I forgot to mention this. Here's why I clicked on it originally, because I thought he looked unwell. Come to find out, he had a stroke.
Oh, wow.
About 1.5 years ago, I think it is. I could be wrong on the date, but I was like, oh, he is unwell. He had a stroke, and he was talking about it. He was driving in his car with his wife, and he started doing crazy shit, and they pulled over, and he fucking had a major stroke. Wow. So he's recovering his body from it. He's walking with a cane. He's but he's got all these goals, and he's talking about how he's bringing his body back, and you got to just find
somebody
to
look into for sure. And you got to respect somebody who takes that long to write a single book. I've heard, they really pour their heart and soul into it. So I'm sure that our audience is going to dive right into the laws of human nature, because you did do an excellent job of introducing it into this particular podcast. So we appreciate that. Thanks. All right. So Nous, for a moment, I'd never heard it before until you had mentioned that. I didn't do any intense study of Greek philosophy. I wasn't too into, Aristotle. As I was doing the research and checked out the Wikipedia entry you had mentioned on the show, you had printed off a bunch of stuff. I was looking at it, and it was a little challenging to read and understand. So I guess what I'd like to know is, first of all, could you just reiterate what nous is and what it means? And then again, inspiration behind what we can do to use that in our life.
Basically, it's a Greek word that was used pretty common up to the 17th century, and it means mind, intellect, intelligence. That's what it is. And the idea around the word is that when you're coming from that place, you'll tap into real truth. You'll tap into the Athena mind, so to speak, the goddess Athena. And she brings down the rational mind, the rational thinking. And I loved how he talked about it in the book, where he said that, when Athena would visit them, meaning the generals, the artists, whatever, the politicians, whatever, would bring them the right thinking, but also the right strategy for what they needed to do. And it's very much like I talk about universal mind. Like, everything's already here, but when we're in chaos, we can't get to it. We can't get to the truth. We can't get to the rational thinking, the good choices, the answers, but they're all here. So I loved the way that he broke it down. And then I thought it was amazing that he put Dostoevsky's quote on the bottom of that one page, because, I mean, what a character he was. The idea of, it's crazy, but you want to do it. It's silly as fuck, but you want to do it. And we all have moments like that. We can't resist the impulse.
You're pulled
it's stupid, it's sophomoric, whatever. And sometimes it's not even good for us, and we cannot resist doing it. We have to acknowledge that part of our mind is there,
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad you shared that with us, because I would have had no idea. And it's really interesting to read a little bit more about that intellect, intelligence, and how it relates to the great philosophers of the time and the Greeks and stuff. That was really cool. You also, getting back to Greene, you had mentioned he talked about the ego trap. Can you break down what he's referring to when he says things like ego trap and how that applies to us today?
Yeah. So the way that I was reading into his thought process was that if he's in this intense emotion, there's several different places he could be coming to with motive for an incorrect decision, right? So if you go back and you study what was going on, there was this huge conflict between Athens and Sparta. And the change that was happening was not being accepted by everybody. So there's a lot of rhetoric going on. And that's why I said in the podcast, it's not all that different from what's going on now.
Say, it sounds very familiar.
It sounds very familiar. And, hearing all of this, now I'm going to bring something else up about Lincoln. Remind me if I forget.
Totally.
Hearing, being in committee and he's hearing all of this, he can't get his mind straight. And then he's like, okay, I need to separate my reaction from all the craziness that's going on, what everybody's throwing out at the table at the same time. But I also want to make sure that I'm getting my own agenda out of the way, right? Because look, I may be sitting down, I may be in a board meeting, I could be in Congress, I could be in any type of a situation that involves other people, but there's a higher agenda there. And maybe I have a personal agenda that's off from that agenda. I have to be able to separate that. So he created the premise and the standard of, I'm going to put Athens first. What's best for Athens and the people of Athens, and come from it from that standpoint, so I don't get my ego involvement of being right, wrong, or having a different agenda come up and then get emotionally involved in that and then try to push that agenda. So the ego's winning, but I'm losing the battle because I'm not doing what's right for Athens. And that's where he was coming from.
And you're basically refusing to move off of your position. You cannot be swayed. You are being trapped by your ego, not allowing anybody else to dictate. Even though you may be a little inaccurate in your thinking, if you allow yourself to not be swayed, then you're in the trap of the ego.
Yeah, 100%.
And you'd mentioned Lincoln. I assume Abraham Lincoln. Is that what you're talking about?
So Lincoln. So what's interesting about that is people that have known me for a long time know that for years I've talked about, if anybody gets a chance to do this, one of the most amazing experiences a person can have. It's probably about 20 years ago now. They redid the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Illinois. Excuse me. I'm from Illinois. I'm from Chicago. So I remember one time me and my wife and kids went down to the Springfield Museum. It was probably around 2006, maybe, somewhere in that area. And I had not seen the new one. I had been to this. It was when you lived in Illinois. It was a field trip when we were kids to go to Springfield,
sure,
right, to see the tomb and where he lived, his house, and the whole thing. So they create this museum, and part of the museum. So the museum is, they walk you from his birth to his death, and they have it all set up here's the house that he lived in. This is what it looked like. Here's the whole process of him being president and everything that he went through and stuff. But you go through this hallway, and the hallway is actors that have recorded the debates about the Emancipation Proclamation. And this was the big struggle for Lincoln. And what's fascinating is that you get to see the posters in the newspapers of the way that they politicized things back in the day, right, when he was president.
Sure.
And it's pretty horrific. I mean, you want to talk about racist. I mean, Christ's sake, this was like blatantly racist. It's very different than what yes, racism is today, but then it was very much in your face, like constantly in your face. And they're arguing this as an intellectual argument, which is also pretty fascinating. But then you get to walk through this hall where you see the pictures and you hear the arguments going on at the same time. And if you think to yourself about what it must have been like for him to sit there and listen to this, and he has to make the right decision, right? And it's well known that Lincoln did think that black people were less than, not as good as white people, which I don't remember hearing that when I was a kid, like when we learned about Lincoln.
Right.
But it's true, right? He actually had that viewpoint. So he has to make a decision about what's best for the country. And see, a lot of people think, well, he made a decision to what was best for black people. Not to my understanding, he didn't. He made a decision to what was best for the country. What's going to move this country progressively forward, right? And it's going to be equality for all people. Yeah. So the idea was, anyway. Sure. But when you go through that, if you can imagine what it would be like to have a decision like that resting on your shoulders, and you've got the Civil War, for God's sakes, right? I mean, people are dying in our country in mass over this ideology. So, to break the back of slavery was an enormous thing to do. And you have to remember, half the fucking country doesn't want you to do it, right? It's not like if we were talking about it today, where you'd have maybe 90% and or maybe 2% would not want something like that to happen. Then it was half the fucking country, right? It's and the arguments though. So when you get to go through it, you get to put yourself in the position of hearing the actual dialogue, because this is all recorded. This is all recorded history. The actual dialogue that was going on in the arguments, and it makes you wake up to the reality of what the decision must have been like. I mean, obviously we can't 100% know because we're not in the situation, but to put yourself in that situation and experience it, it was a huge wake up for me. Like, to really think about what that decision must have been like. And when I was reading Robert Greene's book and he was talking about what he went through, listening to them in committee or whatever, I immediately thought of walking down that hallway in the Lincoln Museum where you get to experience the arguments on the floor of Congress, and they're presenting this, and it's pretty horrific language. I mean, it's language of the day. It is what was acceptable 200 years ago. It's very different than today. But I think everybody should experience it. Like, I'm a big proponent of going down there and really seeing what it was like to have to make that decision. And you also have to see, and here's another thing. This is a mistake that we make. I'll come out and say, okay, so it's factual evidence that Lincoln thought that black people were not as good as white people. So we can make Lincoln wrong for that. That's an error. That's an error. And it's not that the thinking was right. It's the time, right? It's in the history of what were people's beliefs and how did they view things? Because if you make it wrong, you cannot understand the struggle on any end. You can't look at what we know today and the changes that we've made today and go back and see what other people did that was wrong and think in the same mindset, because it doesn't mix. It doesn't compute. We have, we've grown from cavemen basically into what we are now. And it was also a progression of awareness about human rights and society and the way we treat people. We didn't always have those beliefs. You could call it wrong if you want. It doesn't really do anything to help us understand why they had the beliefs to begin with, because I think that's the important thing. This way we don't repeat it. If we can understand where the ignorance came from, how did it develop, how did it spread into so many people's minds, and we can understand that without judging it, but still knowing that it's not right, we have a much better chance of not repeating something like that. When we forget those things of our past, it's very dangerous. So I think people should go. If you ever get an opportunity, it's a very eye-opening experience, that museum.
Definitely.
Very, very eye-opening.
Yeah, and when you were talking about that, it made me think a little bit about, even 5-10 years ago, things were very different than they are today.
Very.
But if you go back 5-10 years ago, a lot of those things were acceptable. So it's always fascinating to me when something I said in 1985 can be thrown back at me in today's day and age and be like, look how ignorant you were. But when you said in 1985 things were a lot different than they are in 2020,
Right.
it makes total sense, right? You cannot cross-pollinate eras and say, well, look at how ignorant you were back here,
Right.
when that's what the mass consciousness at the time
Right.
was doing. And in this day and age, we know better. And I like to think I've always known better, but I've slipped and I've said things that I wish I could take back. But it was the product of the time. It's not a cop-out. It's not anything like me not taking responsibility. But when they start, flinging things back and forth like that, it kind of irritates me a little bit.
Yeah, but you can't get into the rational thinking.
Right.
Because you're reacting and you're judging and you're assuming, and you don't have, most of it's hearsay. You don't have the factual data to then go back and sit down and really think about what's going on. The other thing that he did, he worked on understanding his own emotions around it. Why am I feeling angry? Why am I frustrated? Why am I anxious? Why am I vengeful? Why am I whatever? He went through his emotional process and understood, oh, it's because I have an insecurity about this. Oh, it's because I'm afraid of this. Oh, I'm worried about that. And when he understood that, he was able to then get that out of the way, because it wasn't a reality. It wasn't that this existed here and it was causing him to feel this way. It existed here inside him. And he was reacting based on his own fear and insecurity. So that's got to get out of the way also. But if you're reacting emotionally, you're not going to get to that awareness. That enlightenment's not there. You're in the dark, and that's where the bad decisions happen.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting because in the therapy game, they call that self-inquiry, right? And if you're not going to be able to do it, if you cannot do any work on your insides unless you are first able to master self-inquiry. I should know that because I've been going through it the last couple of years.
Right.
And I used to just react. Like I was a reactionary kind of guy. Now, about 50% of the time, I draw myself back and I start asking myself the questions, what's the truth in this that I've learned from you? Or, I start going down through my process of self-inquiry and realizing that what's happening inside of me is exactly the opposite of what I'm feeling. It's really, I'm able to stop, take a breath, and observe what's happening, and then I proceed with a rational mind as opposed to that emotional mind that we keep coming back to.
And what happens when you don't do that?
Oh, God, when I don't do that, I say something ridiculous, I isolate, I push people away, and then I cower for 3 days without having to apologize because I'm not going to say I'm sorry. Like it just, when I don't stop and take a breath, I am going to say something that's going to put me in hot water, and then I make myself wrong. I'm full of shame, I'm full of guilt, and nothing productive comes out of it.
Yeah.
So just by taking a breath and thinking before you speak, and this is perfect around right now with COVID and all the things that are going on in our country, stop and take a moment to think before you speak and realize what's the motivation behind this or what's the truth behind this before I do it. I'm not besmirching anyone from getting out there and using their platform for good, but if you're doing it to spew vitriol and hate, we don't need it.
No.
We don't need it. Our country is struggling right now. I mean, I said the other day, and it's not that I'm not proud of my country, but I'm not feeling a great sense of pride with how people are behaving right now. And it's well within their right to exercise and, not suppress their feelings. But man, it's scary. It's difficult. And it really makes me think that we should be doing better. And we will do better. I mean, we will get better. We will get through this. But with everything that's gone on over the course of the past 3 months, it's kind of hard to think about anything but it.
There was, I saw an article, and I'm really shooting at the hip here because I just glanced over it, I think it was this morning. There was some people in the government, and they made a statement that they're trained to look at this in other countries as a sign of total collapse in a country. Exactly what's happening right now in our country. If they saw this in another country, the civil discourse, that's what's going on, right? The uncivil discourse, what's going on, that it's a major sign that the whole country is on the brink of actual collapse. So you've got a major health factor, you've got an economic crisis that we've never seen before, and now we have a racial issue that has just blown up enormous. And we have we're in the middle of an election year,
Sure.
right? With a very popular and a very unpopular president.
More divisive.
Right.
Yeah.
Divisive everywhere. So it's a tinderbox. It's people really need to take a step back and take a breath and think about consequences, because turning around mistakes this enormous don't always happen.
That's right. 100%. Yeah, that is very scary. You talked a little bit about clarity, and you said that clarity is the natural state of the universe, which I loved in the episode. And then you said worry, fear, and doubt are not. And I know there's a lot of worry, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of doubt that's gripping our country right now. So how can we hold up the truth to stay clear and calm when it seems like what you had just mentioned is sort of falling apart around us? How do we leave it up to the individual to hold up that truth and stay clear?
So, the idea is, as he did with Athens, we call it raising your standard here at Life Is Now. And when we do coaching, a standard is something that we are going to stand for, right? It's a pinnacle of value. It's a pinnacle of belief. It's a pinnacle of moral aptitude, so to speak. What are we fighting for? What are we working for? What are we living for? What are we dedicating our life to? Why? And be real clear about that, because when we have that North Star, we can go back as we're going through a difficult time, we could say, does this lead to the North Star? If it doesn't lead to the North Star, I better have a damn good excuse for changing it and have my facts straight, because it's going to take me somewhere else, and probably somewhere else that I don't want to be, right? So as a country, I feel we've lost our North Star. As a society, we have 40 million people out of work. Where the fuck is their North Star, right? You're talking about people that they're at a socioeconomic place in our society that is extremely vulnerable. They don't always realize how vulnerable our economic society is. It's very vulnerable. But because we've never really experienced anything like this, you have to really do the study and the understanding to realize how vulnerable it is. When you live in a time where nothing ever bad really happened, you're like, well, fuck, nothing can ever happen. Like, what the fuck could possibly happen? That's all, doomsayers that say that. The truth is, there's a lot of doomsayers out there, but it really could happen. It doesn't take much to topple something, even if it appears very strong. The right set of circumstances at the wrong time, boom. And then we have COVID. Then we have the racial issues that, it's like,
highest unemployment rate in years. And yeah, you're right.
Well, if you look at it, we have had an atrocious amount of black people dying at the hands of police officers. Okay. But we ain't seen anything like the way people are reacting to it now. And yes, I think that people are fed up. They're tired of it. It needs to change. I agree with all of that, right? However, you cannot separate the idea that you have so many people in distress in their lives, and this is fueling the fire of their own pain, right? And it's being like, here's the perfect target. This is a great way for me to release all of my pain and anger because of this injustice. The symbolism of that injustice reverberates through all of the other injustices that are happening at the same time. Like, you can't deny that this is all happening at the same time. It fuels it. That's a lot of emotion. That's a lot of fear. It's a lot of fucking fear, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And this is a perfect segue to my last question, and this is something we'll leave our audience with. Can you provide or perhaps reiterate the strategies that a person should exercise when working with the rational mind and bringing the truth to every situation? I believe in the episode you had mentioned thinking about what is the best for all. So thinking about how do we work with the rational mind to bring truth to every single situation we're dealing with?
So everybody has to look at their own life for this. But the idea is that so let's start with yourself. What is the best for you? Okay, what is your life going to be about? You get clear about that. What is your North Star? What is the standard you're going to hold yourself to? Now you have things like your family, your job, your business, your country, the social things that you're involved in. When you're involved with things with other people, we have to look at what is in the integrity of that unit, the family unit, the socioeconomic unit, the country as a unit, our job, our business as a unit. Where is that going, right? I may have to make decisions where I have to sacrifice something because it's in the best interest of the company. You know, we all have had to sacrifice.
Correct.
Everybody's had to sacrifice right now in the best interest of the country,
Yes.
right? And then when you have people that are making shitty ass decisions, you know, and shooting their mouth off about stuff because people are frustrated and they're angry about what's going on and they don't know what they're going to do. They don't know how they're going to feed their families. And people are tossing things around for political purposes. You know, it fuels discontent. So you have to have that thing in your life of what is like, if I'm going to put everything aside for a moment, the craziness, what is it? What is my ultimate objective? Right? But here's the problem. Here's the problem now. A lot of that objective was taken away from us. And people haven't found another one yet. We haven't had enough time. It's only been going on for 3 months.
Right.
I mean, you need some time to be able to sort that shit out. People are still trying to worry about how they're going to pay their bills, you know? So, but to answer the question is finding out what is that ultimate objective for my life, my family, whatever you're involved in your life.
Yeah, because if you're a rudderless ship, you're just aimlessly drifting through the waters and you're not going to get to where you need to go.
No.
So if that has been taken away from you, you need to find a new thing to look towards. And I
Right.
know that's difficult and it's probably not readily there, but if you do some soul searching and think about it, chances are you'll come up with it.
And in the beginning, when you start doing it, it can be day by day. It could be like, what's my
it
standard
doesn't have to be
for
long
today?
distance,
No,
long
it does
term.
not. It does not. Because we don't know what we're going to be doing in 6 months. We might all be back at home in a month. I mean, we don't know what's going on. But the idea is, what do I need to do today? Much we know. We have today in front of us. What is my objective for today? What is my objective for tomorrow? Like when you do your running, you've been running now for what, 10 years, I think?
Yeah, it feels
right?
like it, yeah.
You don't think to yourself about 4 years in advance. You think about, I need to get my ass out of bed and go run today, right? Just today. That's all I got to do. I got to do today, right? Because it's too much to consider all the different possibilities of you not being able to run because of something. It's like, true. I can't imagine what would happen in your head if you started thinking that way.
Totally. Well, first of all, I'd attract an injury. I'd be like, oh yeah, and in 3 weeks I'll be able to hit this milestone, and then next thing you know, you get your foot run over by a bus or something.
Right.
You can't look too far ahead, and that's
No.
why I think, we wouldn't have been talking about what we're talking about today this time last week.
No.
So you can't look too far ahead, and we can learn from the past, and we will learn from the past, but at the same time, you got to stay as present as possible. I always tell my kids, stay in the present. It's a gift. That's why they call it a present, right? Words to live by for me, because I am a forward, backwards thinker, but it's really something that we can all take into consideration and just try to be better and focus on that one day at a time.
For sure.
All right. Well, thanks for coming inside.
So keep your noose tight.
Keep your noose tight. Thanks for coming inside.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming inside. Now you know that we're going to master our noose, and you can start today. Be sure to ring that bell and leave a comment below so we know if you are enjoying this content. We'll catch you on the next one. Later.